Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating, ancient sermon to find some much-needed wisdom for our modern lives. We're looking at a story of absolute, unbelievable triumph that is followed almost immediately by crushing disappointment. Picture this. The Israelites have just experienced a massive victory. They crossed the Red Sea, they left their brutal lives as slaves in Egypt behind, and they're essentially born anew as God's people. But as we're going to see, the reality of living as God's people, it definitely wasn't some romantic stroll down a red carpet. It was a harsh, grueling trek straight into the sure desert.
And this brings us right to the core question of our explainer today. When the high of a massive victory fades and you find yourself staring at a barren, unforgiving landscape, how do you actually recover gratitude in an absolute desert? Because when the Israelites finally found water at a place called Marah, the water was bitter. They literally couldn't drink it. And their immediate reaction? Well, they completely melted down and started to complain.
And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates a very real, very human reality. Because how long do you think it took for them to break? Just 3 days. 3 days of wandering without water before they started bitterly complaining at Marah. Now, when we first read this, it is so easy to judge them. I mean, 3 days, after literally seeing the Red Sea part in front of their eyes, it feels a little pathetic, doesn't it? But hang on, let's shift our perspective for a second, and I absolutely love the analogy the source material uses here. Think about how easy it is to look at someone doing household chores and think, oh, what's the big deal? But if you are suddenly thrown into a week of solo parenting, your entire perspective flips. You suddenly understand their deep, bone-tiring exhaustion. Now apply that to Moses and the Israelites. We aren't talking about a fun little family camping trip here. There were roughly 600,000 men, plus women, children, and countless livestock, all rushed out of Egypt with zero supplies. Put yourself in their shoes for a second. You're wandering a trackless wasteland, your kids are crying from thirst, animals are dying, and you have absolutely no idea if or when you will ever find water again. When you look at it that way, their panic is actually incredibly relatable.
And what's really interesting is how this perfectly bridges the gap between their ancient desert and our modern lives. Because we face our own unpredictable wilderness moments today, don't we? When financial trouble hits out of nowhere, when we get unexpected and terrifying health news, when lingering problems just won't resolve no matter what we do, or when we have to sit by and watch our loved ones suffer in pain. When we face these agonizing moments and we can't see the finish line, we get just as anxious and frantic as the Israelites did at Marah. We all know the right answer is to be grateful and to trust God, but in the middle of a literal desert, how do we actually do that?
Section 1. Complaining versus crying out. Let's redefine how we make our pleas.
So often, we suffer from the immense pressure of toxic positivity. It's like we think we have to swallow our complaints and just paste on a fake, happy smile. But look at these incredibly raw words from David in Psalm 13. He is completely unfiltered here. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? This isn't some polite, polished Sunday school prayer. This is a severe, agonizing complaint. David is boldly demanding that God intervene in his painful reality. And get this, he isn't the only one.
The scriptures are actually packed full of faithful people making what we might call righteous complaints. I mean, Job was in so much agony, he just wanted his life to end. Elijah, terrified by death threats, ran into the wilderness and literally prayed to die under a broom tree. Habakkuk boldly complained to God that justice was being completely perverted because God seemingly just wasn't listening. If you measure the intensity, these complaints are arguably way harsher than what the Israelites said at Marah. So the crucial takeaway here is this. The issue isn't the complaint itself. It's exactly how that complaint is made.
This is the absolute crux of the issue. Look at the stark contrast here. At Marah, the Israelites aimed hopeless, bitter anger at a human leader. They just vented at Moses with zero expectation that things could actually get better. They were just looking for a scapegoat to blame. But David, Job, and Elijah, their complaints were completely grounded in expectation. Because they trusted God, they brought their raw, unfiltered, messy emotions directly to him, fully expecting that he had the power to intervene and actually change their circumstances.
Section 2. God's covenant love, which really dives into the character of God.
So why can we so confidently cry out to God with our most bitter complaints? Well, the sermon points us straight to Psalm 107, which brilliantly outlines 4 distinct episodes of human distress. First, you have people wandering aimlessly in a wasteland. Second, people suffering in absolute darkness because they flat out ignored God's teachings. Third, people facing severe trouble because of their own foolish rebellion and sin. And fourth, merchants encountering a deadly, unpredictable storm at sea. Now, some of these crises were random, unavoidable accidents, but some were the direct, undeniable result of the people's own sinful choices. Yet, the outcome in all 4 scenarios was exactly the same. When they cried out to God in their distress, He saved them.
But why? Why would He save even those who brought the disaster totally upon themselves? It all comes down to this absolutely critical Hebrew concept, Hesed. God responds to our cries not because we are perfectly qualified or because we haven't made stupid mistakes, but because of His Hesed. It is a steadfast, covenantal love. It is a fierce, relentless faithfulness to His people. He doesn't save them because of their perfection. He saves them because of His unwavering commitment to the relationship.
So let's take this right back to those bitter waters of Marah and see how this plays out in real time. The people grumbled these hopeless, empty complaints to Moses. But Moses took the path of Hesed. He cried out directly to God, and immediately God responded. He didn't just offer up some comforting words or a pat on the back. He offered a highly practical solution. He showed Moses a piece of wood, a branch, to throw right into the water. Section 3. The true meaning of tests. Why did God actually test them?
We have to pause here for a second and address a massive misunderstanding about why God allowed that water to be bitter in the very first place. The source material points us slightly ahead in the story to Exodus 20:20, where Moses says to the people, "Do not be afraid, God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning." You see, God's tests are never, ever meant to crush His people. They are meant to deliver them from the absolute slavery of fear.
And this is the core theological breakthrough of this entire explainer. Listen to this. If the bitter water at Marah was a test of Israel's worthiness or their qualifications to be God's people, well, they failed completely and miserably. But it wasn't about them proving themselves to God at all. It was a test designed for God to prove Himself to them. He was proving that He answers their cries, that He honors His covenant, so that this newly free group of people would learn to rely completely on Him instead of living the rest of their lives as slaves to fear and anxiety.
Section 4. From bitter to sweet. Taking action in the desert.
Now that we really understand the depths of God's covenant love, what does this ancient lesson actually demand of us today? Well, remember that branch? God didn't just snap His fingers and magically make the water sweet while Moses stood by doing nothing. God showed Moses the piece of wood, sure, but Moses had to physically pick it up and throw it into the water. Healing and restoration require our active obedience. Even when God's ways seem totally illogical to our human understanding, like, I don't know, throwing a random stick into a massive pool of bitter water, we are called to trust the guide and take that action of obedience anyway.
So, I really want to ask you directly. Are you walking through the wilderness right now? Are you standing at your own personal Marah, staring down a reality that just tastes entirely bitter? Whether it's a terrifying health crisis, a total financial collapse, or a relationship that's just causing you deep, agonizing pain, I want you to know you don't have to swallow your frustration and pretend everything is fine. You don't have to put on that fake smile.
The lesson of Marah is just so profound. Take your raw, bitter, messy realities directly to God. Cry out to Him with the full expectation that His Hesed, His steadfast love, is real. Trust in His fierce faithfulness, take whatever step of obedience He puts right in front of you, and watch how He can take you from the bitter waters of Marah straight into the abundance of Elam. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I'm going to leave you with this one thought to chew on. What bitter waters do you need to bring to God today?